The idea of a zoo at Thompson Park began in 1916, when a former Watertown attorney, George Lawyer, suggested a zoo at the park would be a great attraction. But it wouldn't be until 1920, though, that action was taken, when 10-year-old Raleigh Fairbanks started the Park Zoo Club and raised enough money to purchase Bucko the bear, and when the Northern New York Trust donated 2 white-tailed deer to the park. The goal when it started was to create a naturalistic habitat that would offer its visitors an opportunity to enjoy the grace and beauty of our indigenous animals. But like zoos across the world at the time, care was far from what it is today. In the early 1900s, small habitats with little regard to safety for both humans and animals was the norm, and even in the largest zoos in the United States. Eventually, the zoo would acquire exotic animals, like African lions and monkeys and alligators, and continued to operate for decades with no admission fees and no budget to grow the size of the animals' habitats. The animals lived in tight quarters their entire lives. But the passing of the zoo's Tim the Lion in 1982 would see the seeds of change planted at the top of the park. The zoo needed to change, or the zoo needed to close. And change is what we did. With the help of the local community and more than a few miracles, the zoo raised money and grew. And in 1992, our mission changed entirely. We became a true conservancy, focused on the education and protection of native New York species, the only one of its kind. Gone were the cruel concrete floors. And in their place, lush grass and natural environments, where the animals under our care can live their best lives, under the best possible care. The old cages have all been destroyed. And replaced with water features, comfortable grounds, and room to run. After 101 years, Zoo New York is now home to many endangered and extirpated species, like elk, bald eagles, mountain lions, wolverine, and lynx, most of which are rescues who had nowhere else to go. The zoo, your zoo, is now something to be proud of. But in order to keep the mission going, we all need to look to the future. And that future under our current funding model simply isn't sustainable. Currently, the zoo sits on 12 acres and is funded almost entirely by entry fees and donations. We also haven't grown in over 20 years because of this funding model. And we're only one of a handful of zoos that attempt to operate this way in the entire country. And without growth, no organization, including ours, could last another 100 years. Let's take Disney, for example. There has not been a single year that Disneyland hasn't grown in some sort of way since they opened the doors in 1954. Walt Disney himself was famously quoted as saying, "Disneyland will never be completed. It will continue to grow as long as there's imagination left in the world." Now, we recognize we're not California, but let's look at this locally. Boldt Castle had all but fallen into the St. Lawrence River. But then, in 1977, the castle was given to the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, and over the next 20 years, they invested millions into rebuilding the castle and the future of tourism all over the river. And that constant investment continues to this day. It simply wouldn't work without it. Investment is everything. The only way we at the zoo can see this really working is to not only grow, but effectively play catch-up over the last 20 years. We would need to double in size into our full 25 acres of space, bringing in new animals and expanding our dedicated mission of conservation and education. Like the American bison, who at one time used to roam free all over New York and the entire East Coast. Sadly, 200 years ago, the last wild herd was slaughtered. But soon, you could see these mammoth animals roaming in a large-scale habitat here at the top of Thompson Park. These massive mammals can get up to over 2,000 pounds. The majestic moose is a rare sight here in New York State. In fact, the DEC estimates the population to be as little as 550 to 900 moose in all of northern New York. With our expansion, we'll be able to house and care for these important native species and do our part in the conservation to help keep these amazing animals here in New York. The fox can be seen all over New York, but they can also be very elusive, as they're mostly out on the hunt at night.
Having a family of these stealthy predators would provide a world of wonderful education opportunities. Did you know that over 165 fish species call New York home? It only makes sense. New York has 7,500 lakes and ponds and 70,000 miles of rivers and streams. That's not including all the saltwater fish that call New York's ocean coast home. Fresh and saltwater aquariums at Zoo New York would allow everyone to come face to face with underwater nature like never before. Harbor seals weigh up to 285 pounds and measure up to 6 feet in length. And where you won't see them in the Adirondacks, they can be found spending the winter on our oceanic coasts. The harbor seal was once an abundant species in New York Harbor. Think of how much we can learn right here in northern New York with these amazing sea mammals calling Zoo New York home. Adventure parks are a fantastic way to get up and into nature. Now Zoo New York will become home to the first full adventure park in the Tri-County area, giving both adults and kids a great escape into adventure. Just think of all the possibilities there are for this gem on the top of the hill. We started with a little land, some donated deer, and a black bear named Bucko. Now, the zoo has grown to 12 acres of lush greenery and only native New York species. With a dedicated mission of conservation and education. But after 2 decades since our last master plan, it's become clear that the only way for the zoo to survive another 100 years is again to grow and make your zoo even better for the future generations of Northern New York. Not just for our children, but our children's children. But in order for the zoo to stand the test of time, we need to find the path forward together.